A big hand to our Story Share band, aren't they great? Good evening and welcome to beautiful Orvis Auditorium here on the campus of the University of Hawaii at Manoa for another SCEP Live Online concert series. My name is Tim Slaughter, your host for the evening. SCEP Live Online is a production of University of Hawaii Presents, based at the University of Hawaii at Manoa Outreach College. I'd like to take a moment and thank our partners and sponsors for the series, the University of Hawaii at Manoa Music Department, the East-West Center Arts Program, the Hawaii State Foundation on Culture and the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the University of Hawaii, Kainoa Senior Services, Friends of Manoa Library, and you, our audiences. We have a special performance for you tonight that we call Story Share. If you joined us on April 23rd, you heard 6 beautiful, moving stories about memories related to the university. Well, we're back with more stories, but this time about memories of life in Hawaii. And getting us started this evening is our MC, Ben Moffitt. Take it away, Ben.
Aloha kako. You've been listening to the Story Share Band, led by Bailey Matsuda on piano, Chris Ye on saxophone, and Dr. Alex Morgan on bass. As Tim said, tonight you're going to be hearing personal stories about Hawaii. You're going to hear about natural disasters and natural wonders, human disasters and human wonders. I'll be telling a short story here at the beginning and one at the end. My stories are from the viewpoint of a newcomer to Hawaii. I arrived at the Honolulu International Airport at night 38 years ago. After flying from Boston all day and most of the night, I arrived in a daze. First impressions. The air. Warm, yes, but somehow softly caressing. The smell of diesel exhaust, of course. Mixing with flowers? Sweet-smelling flowers? Oh, the lei, of course, I know about them. There won't be one for me today. I don't know anyone here. In fact, the place I was planning to stay with a friend of a friend had fallen through at the last minute. I didn't have enough money to stay at a hotel. I was here for grad school. And it was much too late to check into a youth hostel. So at the suggestion of my taxi driver, an Asian man with a rosary and a cross on his rear view mirror and a Kuan Yin on his dashboard, we headed for the Armed Forces YMCA on Hotel Street. As we were driving, I noticed the driver was checking me out in the rearview mirror. I think he noticed how befuddled I was and pegged me for a out-of-town rube because he repeatedly warned me, whatever you do, don't walk on Hotel Street tonight. The Hotel Street Y. It was in that great old building that Chris Hemeter remodeled and which is now the home of the Hawaii State Art Museum. In those days it was pretty run down, but the facade was still quite stately. Restless dreams. Interrupted by the sound of drunken revelry outside, shouts and door slams down the hall. More restless dreams, worried dreams, blending into bird song. But what kind of birds are these? I've heard birds all around the world. I've never heard birds like these. Where am I? I woke up early, partly because my body clock was 6 hours ahead, and then mainly because I was so eager to launch myself into this new life in this strange new world. I decided to walk to the university, which would be the center of my life for the next 3 years. Checking the map, I saw I could just go straight up King Street. But by Makiki, I was starting to fade. By Mo'ili, I was seriously crashing. I didn't have breakfast. When was the last time I ate? I got to get something to eat right away. And then I saw it. The sign for a delicatessen. Oh, great. I could use a matzo ball soup right now. Oh, after that, I'll get a hot pastrami sandwich. And, I'll take some bagels to go for later. And for dessert, a slice of pie. And so I stepped into the Fukuya Delicatessen on King Street. This doesn't smell right. Where's the pecorino and the parmesan? This doesn't look right. Where are the salamis and the hams? The cold cut slicers? Where's my matzo ball soup? I don't believe my eyes. Sushi in a deli? I must have been an amusing sight that morning in the Fukuya Delicatessen. I stuttered a bit, stammered a bit, and beat a hasty yet awkward retreat. I went up the road and found a place that would serve me bacon and eggs with toast. Oh, rice? No, thank you though. Maybe next time. Our next teller is Margot Smith. She's a retired social scientist living in Berkeley, California, where she advocates for universal health care and economic justice. She received her BA at UH in 1965, an MA in 68, and then went for a doctorate in public health from the University of California, Berkeley, and she got it in 1977. She worked as a researcher for California's health department and later produced award-winning videos about political and social justice issues. To avoid COVID boredom, she now writes. Here now is Margot Smith.
In December 1959, 4 months after Hawaii became the 50th state, we moved to Hilo, Hawaii. My husband was hired to head up a local nonprofit agency, a real promotion for him. And so we moved from California to Hilo with 4 children, aged 6 weeks to 6 years. At that time, the agency provided a house for its executive that was located on the Waiakea Peninsula, a bit of land that reached out into Hilo Bay. On our arrival, the agency board members took one look at our family of small children and arranged for us to move to a house on a hill overlooking the city in Pueo. They said the reason for the change was that the Waiakea house was in a tidal wave zone. Little did we know that this was a real concern. They found us a large Queen Anne-style mansion that had been the home of a prominent lawyer, Carl Carlsmith, recently deceased. It had 3 stories. The grounds were meticulously laid out with tropical flowers. We were very fortunate to live in this wonderful home. We soon settled in Hilo. There was a community of women who welcomed me, and my husband quickly developed relationships with community leaders. But only 6 months later, on Sunday, May 22nd, 1960, at 9 o'clock in the morning Hilo time, an 8.5 magnitude earthquake shook the coast of Chile, 6,000 miles away. It generated a tsunami. Hilo was particularly wary of tsunamis as it had contended with a destructive tsunami in 1946 and small tsunamis in 1952 and 57. Whenever there was a possible tsunami, loud sirens sounded and people were ordered to evacuate low-lying lands. The sirens were tested every Monday at noon. Tsunami warnings happen several times a year whenever a serious earthquake happened in the Pacific Rim of Fire. When warning sirens went off for 20 minutes at 8:30 in the evening on Sunday, May 22nd, we invited friends over who needed to evacuate it. They came over to party. They lived by the shore in Keakaha. One was a family with two young children, another had two teenagers. As time passed, we made the kids comfortable, bedded the younger ones down, and visited with wine. We all expected the evacuation period to last just a couple of hours, the usual with tsunami warnings. At about 10 o'clock, we wondered why the all clear siren had not gone off. We turned on the radio and learned to our dismay that the earthquake in Chile had generated a tsunami. The newscaster reported that waves in Tahiti were only 3 feet high at 8 p.m. However, civil defense, the Hilo police, and media were on high alert. In Hilo, evacuation warnings were repeated over radio and TV. People who were near the ocean or below the 50-foot level were to evacuate to higher ground. Sirens were not used because they would have indicated an all clear. Around 11:30, news came from Harry Kim of Civil Defense that the wave was only 3 feet at South Point and seemed not to be a threat. However, if the tsunami materialized, it would be in Hilo around midnight. By this time, we made a place for the children to sleep and for their parents to stay over. We were glued to the radio. Hilo had one local station, Kimo, and two Honolulu stations. All carried news of the quake. At 11:45, we went up to a screen porch on the third floor to look out over Hilo Bay. From there, we had a full view of the water. Hilo Bay extended in a crescent with the shore off to the right and across the water to the west. It was totally dark. Only a new moon lit the sky. All we could see were the lights of the city reflected on the water. It looked very calm. At around 12 o'clock, midnight, we saw from the reflected light on the bay that the water was receding, then rising at 12:15. Soon the lights on the water indicated that it receded again, the lowest ebb at 12:30. When the water rose at 12:45, we saw that it surged over land. All the lights went out in the business district along the shore. Across the harbor, the Hilo Electric Company that provided power to the city and most of the island exploded, a brilliant green colored arc. Hilo went dark, and the radio station located along the shore went dead. No phones, no local radio. Hilo had no communication with the outside world. The Honolulu radio stations played music. Then again, the water ebbed. To our horror, at 1:05, we heard a tremendous roar like a jet engine. We were hearing and seeing the power of the wave, roaring it through foam, rocks, and debris high above the cliffs below us. We knew that the wave was horrendous, destructive. We were stunned, immobile. At dawn, 5:40 a.m., as soon as light broke, we drove towards town but could not get far. It was absolutely silent, no sound from any human, animal, or activity. Absolute silence. We were shocked at the devastation. The roads were blocked with houses carried off their foundations, boulders, and debris. We passed cars wrapped around telephone poles, not realizing there were injured people trapped inside. They were later rescued. We returned home. There was no way our friends could get to their houses. They would be staying for a while. At about 6:45, we heard Ed Engeldow, a reporter in Hilo, speak on the Honolulu radio station, KHBC. With a voice full of emotion, he reported to the world that there had been a devastating tsunami in Hilo. Luckily, someone had remembered that the local Hilo stockbroker's office up the hill had a direct connection to Honolulu, and Ed broadcast from there. Now on the radio, we received civil defense notices, police notices, and more information. The damage was horrendous. The tsunami destroyed the business district that served the whole island of Hawaii. Hilo, a city of 26,000, was the commercial center for the island. Hilo had a harbor and an airport. The harbor was important because everything was brought in by ship. The 35-foot high wave demolished much of the downtown area and several residential areas. The damage decimated many homes, businesses, and public buildings. Houses floated off their foundations and were blocking roads a mile from their sites. Streets were strewn with debris and impassable. Parking meters were at a 45-degree angle. Dazed, people were standing around the wreckage. Most people in the low-lying areas and along the shore had evacuated, but some, particularly on the Waikiki Peninsula, did not. It was found that they assumed that the sirens were a false alarm, or they were asleep, or they were unaware that they were supposed to evacuate. As a result, a total of 61 people died and 57 were hospitalized. Hilo Hospital was overwhelmed as the injured and dying were cared for. A woman caught up by the wave later died of tetanus. We had been invited to a 42nd birthday party at Cafe 100, a new restaurant, and all that remained of it was a concrete slab with vinyl floor tiles. Our favorite bakery was washed away. The baker had not survived. We had chaperoned a teenage dance at a park pavilion that Saturday night, and it was gone. A woman washed out to sea floating atop her screen door was rescued the next day by the Coast Guard. The houses of the family we hosted would not have electricity or water for a week, so they stayed with us. We were lucky that our house was shared the electric generator with Hilo Hospital, and so we had electricity. Grocery stores were depleted or washed away. We used our stock of canned soups, baked beans, rice, and hot dogs to feed the 14 of us. In recovery, the people of Hilo did not want to repeat their experience of the 1946 tidal wave when it had taken 2 years to clear away the debris. This time, they immediately put out a call to the sugar plantations to bring in their heavy equipment. Homeowners were given 24 hours to put a sign on their houses to save or not to save. If not to save, a crane lifted the house and smashed it against the ground, and a bulldozer loaded the pieces into a dump truck and hauled it away. Within a few weeks, the roads were cleared and property moved. After the tsunami, people salvaged lumber and hardware. They created piles of boards and fixtures reclaimed from the demolished structures. Those in public health let it be known it was important to have tetanus shots, as people were exposed to old nails and rusted metal. In Hilo, many women sewed their clothes, partly as an economy and partly because of Hawaiian styles. They made muumuus, holokus, aloha shirts, lava lavas, and sarongs. As a result, there were many fabric shops downtown. After the tsunami, the shops had bolts of cloth inundated with seawater that needed washing. A call was put out to us women to launder fabric for our favorite shopkeepers. Later, as we drove through town, long, colorful strips of Hawaiian cloth were laid out on the grass to dry. There was much soul searching about the lack of effectiveness of the civil defense and warning system. One obvious problem was that the defense announcements were only in English. At that time, there were many who spoke only Pidgin, Japanese, Chinese, Hawaiian, Spanish, Portuguese, Ilocano, and Tagalog. Hilo's movie theaters played films in Tagalog, Chinese, Japanese, and Hollywood on different nights every week. Also, the siren system had been changed in 1959, and some did not know how to interpret the new system. There were frequent false alarms. As a result of these concerns, Hawaii now has a very good civil defense system. We left Hilo for Honolulu in 1964. However, my being at the 1960 tsunami resulted in my continuing fascination with tsunamis. I'm transfixed whenever they happen anywhere in the world, Japan, Malaysia, or wherever. On a visit to Hilo years later, I was happy to see the town revitalized. There was a beautiful park along the shore where the business district had been. Downtown, the Pacific Tsunami Museum exhibited the history of tsunamis in Hilo and worldwide. Harry Kim, our civil defense hero in 1960, was mayor. The tsunami of May 23rd, 1960 was not forgotten. I was there.
For more survivor narratives of the Hilo tsunamis, visit the Pacific Tsunami Museum in Hilo or their website, tsunami.org. Next up, we have Joe Miller, who's a native of Palama here on Oahu. Joe has been a high school teacher for 40 years in Oahu Catholic schools. He has 3 children, a cat, a dog, and a beautiful wife who still teaches 7th and 9th graders. Joe loves singing, storytelling, and messing around in small boats, mostly native outriggers. He's even built a native outrigger. He has preferred knowing to glowing. However, he's slowly giving up the project of understanding this world in exchange for living each day with gratitude. He can and will talk your ear off if you let him. Here is Joe Miller.
Well, I was raised Roman Catholic. Can't you tell? Raised Roman Catholic, I obey so well. Raised Roman Catholic, can't you tell? I'm going to Catholic heaven because I've been to Catholic school. It was Easter 2019. And I wasn't feeling Easterly. In fact, I was feeling more like the tomb. Depressed. 40 years of teaching that I stepped away from. And, I complained a lot, but I was on the teacher train every day. I knew what to do. There were lessons to be prepared, grades to be given. And I was on that teacher train. And the last 10 years of my teaching experience, we were engaged in what I thought was an incredible thing. We're going to assault the citadel of learning and take it apart. So reform movement. We were going to do things like actually follow what kids' passions were. We're going to reorganize the school to fit what they wanted to learn. We wanted the teachers too to be freed, so we had them teaching in teams. Interdisciplinary, they called it. And even before they had STEM, we were having kids engage in actual projects. They graduated by making things. And I thought, oh my God, we're going to create teaching nirvana. And then there was a change in the wind. The board member retired, president retired. The school began to change, and everything went south. And the democracy that we were looking for, and the nirvana was taken away. And I felt myself at sea and depressed. And I pretended that I was retiring, but the truth was I quit, and I was angry. And I hadn't resolved that. I hadn't really landed. This is 2017. I substituted. I tried all kinds of things to get back on the wagon, but nothing seemed to work. So this Easter, I wasn't feeling it, and my wife said, why don't we go visit the graves? And I said, well, inside, I was feeling like I was in the grave. So I said, okay, normally I wouldn't go. It's been 10 years since I ever stepped at the graveside of my family. So we got into my wife's Honda Fit, new used car. That's all teachers can afford. Drove out to Mililani, and I found my mom and dad's grave. And I stood there, and as I looked at Catherine and Hampton, my dad, and their gravestone, I felt two things. One of them was deep gratitude. 7 kids, paid the tuition, sent us to school, struggled. My mom did the laundry for 7 kids, for all those years. But when I was born, I was the youngest, and as far as I could remember, it troubled me that they slept in separate rooms. Where's the love? And I found out that when I looked at pictures of them from the 30s, my dad had swag. You know what I'm saying? I saw pictures of him in his outfit with Florsheim shoes. He looked like a young Gary Cooper, but with a tan. My mom was dressed in those 30 dresses with her short hair. She looked like she had stepped out of the Joy Luck Club. And I thought, hey, 7 kids, there had to have been a lot of love there. So something had chilled, and I wanted to know what it was. So at that graveside, I said, I need to actually go and consult the stories of the elders that I knew. And my brothers and sisters were still alive. So this was going to be my plan for Easter. I was going to make a journey to the gravesites. So we got in our car, drove across H3 down to Hawaii Memorial Park. And as you come out the Pali, the whole ko'olaus are lit up where the light off of Makapu, and there's those green flows of light. We wandered around. My wife said, it's near the water faucet. But there were 6 water faucets, so we spent an hour. And in there wandering, we finally found Ellen and Anona, her mom and dad, who were buried together like my mom and dad. And it was easy to kind of feel like I was connected to them. And the thought hit me as I was standing there at Mililani Mortuary, because I don't believe in any accidents, and it was just a month before COVID. I was in New Zealand by accident, my daughter's friends, sleeping in maraes. I had slept in maybe 4 maraes, these beautiful structures, and in every one, I always slept next to posts. And on the posts were carved faces of all the relatives, the dead relatives that had gone on. And some of the poor maraes had photographs, but everyone was the same. And all those posts, each family would sleep in front of the posts of their relatives. It would join up with the rafters to a single ridge board, which they called the spine of the chief. And at the entrance of the marae was a fierce carving of the chief or of the navigator. And literally, when you walked into the marae, you actually walked into the body of your tribe. And every kid that I met there, and every person I met there, knew their whakapapa, their genealogy. They knew the tribe they came from, they knew the clan they came from, they even knew the canoe that had come 1,000 years ago. And one day, as I was asked they asked me, could you tell us your soul geography? Uncle, could you tell us what land claims you, what river, what mountain? And I felt naked. I felt impoverished. Because my homeland, Palama, my Aina, was now light industrial. There was nothing there. Warehouses, there was a fast stop with gasoline, and the beautiful landscape that I had played in the 50s. The mango trees, the lychee trees, the Simon stand, and the village was gone. And I felt something in me said, what am I going to do? I need, this is part of my funk I need community. I need a marae. But I don't have a physical one. So I thought, well, maybe what you need to do is visit your family, connect up as best you can, create a marae in your heart. So that's what I was doing at the graveyard. So from Kaneohe, there was one more graveyard. I wanted to touch all the graveyards. And I'm getting ready to leave Hawaii Memorial, and I stumble upon 20 gravestones. Sisters of the Sacred Heart. I was raised Roman Catholic, right? My sister's a nun. And right in front of me was Sister Mary Gertrude. When I was a tiny little kid, my sister had entered right out of high school we'd go visit. We could visit her like 3 times a year at the beginning, just 3 times a year. We'd come to visit. And there was always Sister Mary Gertrude, this beautiful face, radiant. She must have been a beauty. She had come from France, from Brittany, just spent her whole life in the islands. And also at Kaimuki, at Sacred Hearts Academy. But in her last years, she came to run St. Anthony's Home, which is where I live. And as a young teacher, starving teacher, she invited me to live at St. Anthony's in a cottage at the edge of the property as kind of a watchman to be there because the vandals wouldn't come. And I've been there. That's my aina. I've been there for 40 years. And to know that her grave was right here, and I had stumbled upon it, I took up my needle and I stitched her to my marae. And then I had to make the hard journey to Diamond Head Memorial, where my grandfather, Cray Elijah, was resting. And he had been infamous in my family, and I had heard some stories about him. Mostly, I call them he'e stories, stories where you throw up smoke and you disappear. And they're stories that we tell to kind of hide truths, right? And so I needed to speak to really get the picture of my dad, to understand what I felt was his sadnesses. And as a boy, I remember there were only 2 times when only 2 times that he really revealed himself, and that was when he came home drunk, which wasn't often. And there's 2 kinds of drunks, right? Mad and sad. Dad was a sad type. And he would go into this pocket of grief so deep. It was like he was in a cave, and as a young kid, I could never understand. He would just weep, and he would always talk about 2 things, his father and my grandmother. So we get to Diamond Head. I'm looking for Cray. I find his grave, and he's all alone in this field. There's no other millers. There's no one else in his marae. He's just lying there. And so I decided, Easter, we're going to have a potluck. And I remember the story before Odysseus came home, halfway in his journey, in which everything that he wanted crashed, right? All of his ships, all of his men dead. He comes home alone. But midway in the story, he makes a journey to the underworld, and he talks to the dead. And it's so important. He went down, and I was thinking, that's what I'm doing. I'm going down. But Odysseus had to dig a pit, an imu, put in barley and olive oil, slaughter an animal, put blood in it, goat's blood, and then the shades would come, right, to talk to him. So I thought, I don't have to do that. I can just have a potluck. So we had a potluck. My sisters came. Instead of, barley and oats, we threw poke, and we threw, lomi salmon, and we threw some katsu and some Ted spies, and we all gathered. And I wanted to hear the stories. And sure enough, my sisters, after food, I asked them, hey, how come I heard the story of, why is Cray buried up there, and where is Ellen buried? And nobody knew. And they said, how come they're not buried together? So the stories began to flow. And I had heard early that Cray was a cowboy. He had ridden across country. My father, storyteller, I don't know if it was true, could have been a he'e story. He said, he knew Billy the Kid. And in the 50s, I love cowboys. It was rawhide, rolling, 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 keep them doggies rolling. And it was have gun will travel. My earliest picture of me with a gun. No, my grandfather slept with a gun under his pillow. That's what I was told. And so, as I waited to hear the story, I find out the reason Ellen cried at the end of her life in her rocking chair was because Cray sold her horses. Grandma had horses? Yes, in Maui. And then another sister said, no, that wasn't why she was crying. She was crying because Cray shot a cop. And I went, what? Yeah, when your dad was 15, a sophomore at St. Louis on College Walk, Cray was brewing whiskey in a still in Punui. And policeman came, walked into his property. He pulled out his gun. And as he fired, my grandmother hit his hand. And the bullet, luckily, grazed the cop's ear. Cray had to go to jail. My dad had to quit St. Louis. He lost his educational dream. And he had to go to work to support the family. Oh. And I started connecting to why my dad cried a lot when he was young. And something of my relationship to him got tightened. And then I heard even more stories, almost horror stories coming out. They were kind of scary. Some of my nieces started getting finicky, but the stories came. The stories came, painful stories. And I heard that Cray had taken my grandma's horses and sold them. Then another sister said, no, not only the horses, he sold the land. He was a restless guy. He came here to grow tobacco. Tobacco wouldn't grow in the soil, or the leaves would burn up too quickly. And so my grandma had 80 acres of land given to her on Maui. And Cray, in his restlessness, took the land. He sold it for $500. Then he moved the family. I'm guessing he had a fight with Baldwin, who he worked for. Went to Hilo, moved the family again, came back here. So in that restlessness, my grandmother was crying because she had no land to give her 6 children. And that's why she wept. And so she died young at 52 in 1939. And her youngest son, my namesake, Joseph, died in 1937 from rheumatic heart disease. And their graves were lost to the family for 65 years. We never found them. We knew where Cray was. So my brother and I, he'd come back from Notre Dame Catholic Central. Every time he'd come back, every 2 years, we'd go do some researching. And we found, through the Portuguese Society, where Ellen was buried. It was on a plain sheet of paper, hand-drawn, a map, in Kamanaiki Valley, about a mile from my house. And we went up there. And Ellen and Joe, their graves are right there, a mile from where I live. And to make this kind of a beautiful tie-in, in finding the graves, we found through the Portuguese Society, we found kind of a rustic stone that was there. And so we purchased a new headstone, which I just picked up last Tuesday, and we're going to go up there in a week to have a celebration to stitch them back into the family, Ellen and Joseph. Cray lived on for another 15 years, and he got a common-law wife. He died in 52. And at the end of his life, which was full of, as we say, piss and vinegar, he lived in Manoa with my auntie up here, who took in all the stray kupunas, cared for them. And she told me the story at the end of his life. Cray converted. This guy who used to spit on churches when he passed by, converted. This could have been a deathbed conversion. I don't know. I'm not judging. But he converted. And he became a third-order Franciscan, which means when he died, he accepted the burlap sack, the tunic that Francis was buried in, because he wanted to live as a beggar. Cray was buried there at Diamond Head in that tunic. Oops. And my grandmother, in 1939, was also in the Third Order. And she too lies in her grave in Kamanaiki Valley, buried in a great tunic. So in a funny sort of way, in death, they had met in this kind of place of the soul. And I think it's because my grandmother was able to love him. Even through all the horrors, she loved him. And so I want to close with this song to express that love for Palama, where I grew up, which was for me a very, very special place. Queen Lilio came at a hard time in her life and created this marae for herself. It's called Mu'o'olani, which means the first bloom of a tea leaf. It was a place of resurrection for her, where she'd welcome young people. So I'd like to sing that for you. He mea nui ke aloha, ke hiki mai I ohune, me o ku'ule, kai mana ala, kahiko no na
Our next teller is another Keiki Oka Aina, Janine Oshiro. She is a massage therapist and a writer devoted to the transformative power of touch, word, movement, and silence. She's the author of Peer, winner of the 2010 Kundaman Poetry Prize, published by Alice James Books. She's been awarded the 2011 Elliott Cades Award for Literature in Hawaii for an emerging writer, and the 2013 Asian American Literary Award for Poetry. After graduating from Mililani High School, she attended Whitworth University, Portland State University, and the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. These days you can find her online and in person at the Still and Moving Center. Janine Oshiro.
When I was growing up, my dad owned a series of 3 nearly identical gray-green diesel trucks. And the song I remember playing on the radio of every truck is Olomana's Ku'uhome o Kahalu'u. My dad worked in construction. There was a never-ending supply of old trucks his company needed to get rid of. These trucks were dirty, no matter how much you cleaned them. And they always smelled like grease and old leather work boots. I learned how to drive in those trucks. The last one had a hard time starting. My dad showed me how to open the hood and tighten just one screw to get the truck going again. I knew nothing about fixing trucks, but I could climb down from the truck's cab with a screwdriver, and to the surprise of anyone who saw me, get myself going again. When I left home for college on the mainland, I was the kind of girl who wore homemade floral print dresses and combat boots. I saw the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Nirvana in concert, but my prized CD was Olomana's Through the Years. I took it from my brother's collection before I left home. Why would he miss it? Those songs were always on the radio. I needed that CD when I was longing for home or feeling guilty for leaving. I put on repeat those familiar words. Please do not hold on to me. We all must go alone. My first home, where I lived when I was born in 1974, was on the windward side, in the back of a huimanu. The house belonged to my grandpa, who was a carpenter from Okinawa. When my family moved to a new house in Mililani, a man named Kermit rented our old house. My dad took care of my grandpa's rental, and I was delighted every month by the rent checks that arrived with Kermit's name written in cursive on the envelope's left corner. At Christmas time, my job was to wrap up a canned ham and a tin of cookies to deliver to this mysterious man on the rainy side, who, for all I knew, really was named after a frog. The house was tucked up against the steep rise of the Ko'olau Range. A thin metal fence did little to hold back the wild pigs and the jumble of ferns tumbling down the mountain. Kermit owned a motorized sit-down lawnmower for the large sloping yard. Such a thing did not exist for the tidy little picture frame lawns of Mililani. Kermit had a washing machine and a laundry line in his open-air garage. No one in Mililani was allowed to hang their underwear out for everyone to see. Maybe this connection with the other side of the island explained my family's knack for racking up letters from the MTA for our overgrown weeds, our furniture in the garage, our illegally parked cars. When I was little, driving through the tunnel to the other side, penetrating that sheer fortress of mountain, it was a big deal. That was before the H3. We had to wake up early to visit relatives whose names I still only know by place. Kahalu'u Baba, Kaniohe Auntie, Pig Farm Auntie. The windward side felt like another world to me, so distant from the edged lawns, the sidewalks, the approved paint colors of Mililani. One of my favorite childhood memories is going with my dad to pick apple bananas in the patch next to Kermit's house. This was a job usually reserved for my 3 older brothers. I only remember going with my dad a handful of times, pulling the truck off the side of the road just after the dip and parking half in the bushes. I remember pulling my dad's rubber boots on over my shoes, his big girl, and clunking with him through the mud. I was so happy, so willing to follow him anywhere. I went with my dad when he went to drink beer with my uncles. I went with him to the doctor and the grave and breakfast at Zippy's, when he went to fix the toilet at my grandpa's rental. I'd like to think that I was with my dad too when he sat staring at my mom's photo at her living room altar after she died when I was 11. But truthfully, that was his own journey. I spent many years staring at his back. That was mine. I ended up staying on the mainland for 15 years. After college, my best friend and I moved to Portland, where we worked as little as possible and had a really great time. Then there was graduate school, twice. By that time, my dad was on dialysis for diabetes. Everyone said he would be fine. My mind, though, got stuck in the rut of imagining his imminent death. The phone call, the plans I would have to change, what I would wear on the plane, would I have pockets for Kleenex? I knew it was time to go home. I moved home in the summer of 2007, and I lined up work teaching writing courses at Windward Community College. My dad went into the hospital in mid-July. When I told him about my job, his first question was, "You got health insurance? Then why don't you have a savings?" I hung out at the hospital and wrote up a syllabus for English 100. I told him about my very exciting lesson plans. As he said, practically nothing. Well, that was at least pretty close to how we'd always been. I think you know what happened next. What I really want to tell you is what happened as I was driving to my first day of work. Not in a big diesel truck, those were long gone, but in a small Scion XA that my brother and sister-in-law helped me to buy. The fall semester started on Monday, but I was driving to my first day on Friday because my dad had died on Wednesday. I was tired. I was tired from staying up late at the hospital with my family for the past 3 weeks. I was tired because I finally made the decision to return home, and this was not the way it was supposed to be. I was trying to find a happy face to wear to my first day of work. I was trying to stop crying. So I was driving on the H3, headed to the windward side. And as I entered the tunnel, I turned on my headlights and the radio dropped its connection. I was in darkness. I wanted to stay there. I wanted to remain hidden, held in the deepest part of that mountain. Did I have to? Did I really have to reach the other side? But then already, I was there. I crossed the threshold into brilliant green, the sparkle of the ocean and the sun. And in that moment, the radio caught its signal. I heard the familiar quick cascade of the opening guitar, the gentle strum of my childhood soundtrack. And before me, I couldn't believe it. I saw a rainbow. Can you believe it? I was home. Shouldn't I end the story there? A rainbow graced the sky. I was home with that enchanting song lingering in the air. A perfect moment of clarity, synchronicity, and healing. I was home. But if I end my story there, the rainbow might make you forget about the dark tunnel I had just driven through. I still find myself driving through it. I drive through the darkness of the tunnel again and again. Sometimes that darkness makes me forget I have a destination. Am I coming from, or am I going to the other side. Sometimes, though, the darkness is what sustains me. It is the only thing that can hold me. That darkness has no beginning and no end. It is the inescapable part of the story I need to tell you. It is there even as the rainbow shimmers in the mist, even as the song plays on, even as I find another way to keep on driving.
And now one final story. I'd been living here in Hawaii less than 3 years when my brother Bruce and his wife Nuria came to visit me for 2 weeks. They timed their trip to coincide with my spring break from UH. They were leaving Minneapolis, where it was still basically winter. We decided to spend my week off touring around the Big Island. I'd only been there once or twice, but I already had my must-see, must-do list. Number 1, stay at the Monago Hotel, that funky old place in Captain Cook. I stayed in the old wing, which feels like an old camp bunkhouse. My plain, simple room had wooden walls, thin wooden walls that separated it from the adjoining ones. The toilet and shower were down the hall. We're talking 1986. I think I paid $8 or $9 for it. Bruce and Nuria stayed in the new wing with the ocean view and a bathroom right in their room. What luxury! Number 2 on my must-see, must-do list was to go see the volcano in action because it was erupting. Number 3, swim at the Queen's Bath and the Black Sand Beach in Kalapana. So we got up early one morning, drove all the way to Volcano, but the rangers told us it was a lousy day for lava sightings. The mountain was socked in, it was pouring, and we weren't in the mood or equipped to make a long hike across lava fields in the rain with the chance of maybe glimpsing something. So we scratched that off our list and headed to the coast, which we could see was pretty clear. There might be some rain. And so we drove through the rain down towards Kalapana. On the way, we stopped at the amazing Queen's Bath. I don't know if you know about it, but it was an old lava tube that had broken open on top and filled with pure, sparkling spring water. The most exquisite swimming pool you can imagine. ferns around and flowers. I took one look at Bruce and Nudia and could see they'd left winter far behind and they were well into vacation mode, and I could feel grad school tension dripping off my shoulders. When we got there, miracle of miracles, the sun was out again. And then by the time we were back at the car, the hot sun had dried our swimsuits, and it was on to Kalapana and the famed black sand beach. We drove again through showers, but they let up a bit when we got to the coast. And at Kalapana, to our surprise, there was a little music festival going on. It was a real small thing. It was in a grassy ball field with a stage at one end, and on the sides were craft booths and food booths. Well, we went with the flow. We paid a small entrance fee, bought some food and drink, settled ourselves on the lawn to enjoy the music. I don't remember there being very many other tourists there. It was a local thing, community festival. We were caught up in a current, a flow of warm hospitality and welcome. As I'd only been here almost 3 years, I, like my brother and Nudia, was overwhelmed by the Hawaiian hospitality, simply bowled over. Who did we hear? The music was heavenly. Who did we hear? I don't know. Could have been Ledward Kaapana or Dennis Pavao or any of those legendary musicians who were raised there and steeped in the music from the cradle. It was heavenly. I don't remember Halau performing, but dance there was. A song would start, and up from a seat on the grass would arise a dancer. Or someone would come from behind a booth and dance their appreciation, dance their joy, or just dance. It all felt so natural, so human. We were entranced. What would it be like if we all just danced our joy, danced our pain, danced our anger? What would the world be like? We were melting. Actually, we were baking. We were out in the sun, and so we decided to get our wrists stamped and ooze across the road to the black sand beach. A black sand beach. I hope I never become accustomed to such a miraculous thing. We marveled for quite a while, letting the grains of sand run through our hands, examining each little grain and feeling the rough texture. So by the time we were going to get in the ocean, the rain had come again. Who cares? We went splashing in the liquid sunshine. What a sensation. Oh. And by the time we were ready to get out of the ocean, the heavens parted and the sun was out. We dried off, refreshed, and decided to head back to the festival to enjoy more music. And as we crossed the road, we noticed that the cloud had lifted off the mountain quite a bit. And then we saw it. This thing. This enormous thing. What was it? It looked like a vein in the sky. It looked like a massive blood-red pillar going from the ground up to the cloud, static, solid. But then we looked more closely and it was vibrating, glowing, pulsing. It was Pele. It was a fountain of lava rising up out of the ground, and the top of it was cut off by the cloud. We'd tried to get to the lava that day, but the lava got to us. I was shocked. I mean, that lava fountain, you live with it every day, but you try not to face it. That lava fountain slapped me in the face that day. The power, the majesty, the terror. And yet, soon after, I felt somehow lighter, like a child of nature. I mean, like a child, something bewildering was going on around me. Bewildering things are still going on around me. Things I can't understand, things I can't control very well, or not at all. And yet, like a child, I'm allowed to go about my business and do things within limits. I get to swim in the Queen's bath. I get to swim at a black sand beach. I get to hear music and eat and drink and enjoy the hula and feel powerful, human warmth. And then when I least expect it, it seems, I look up and there's a lava fountain gushing my way. Or a big dark cloud that may be concealing a volcano or hiding something else that is dangerous, maybe deadly. Eventually, something deadly will catch me and everyone I love. One year later, the Queen's bath was buried in lava. 4 years later, the earth began to reclaim Kalapana. Most of old Kalapana town is now under lava. That grassy ball field, under 50 feet of lava. I've heard that a black sand beach is reformed at Kalapana. It might be hard to get to, though. That experience reminds me of just how much is out of my control, how fragile it all is, and how much there is to savor as a child of nature. Keiki o Ka'aina. Whenever I remind Bruce and Nuria about that day, they suddenly get very sober and thoughtful. And then after a bit, one of them will look up and say, "We've got to start planning our next trip to Hawaii." Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm going to send it over now to Tim Slaughter.
All right. Thank you, Ben. It's absolutely fabulous evening tonight. And I can't thank our tellers enough for such beautiful, moving stories. So I want to say a big mahalo once again to Janine Oshiro, Joseph Miller, and Margot Smith. Thank you so much for sharing with us and our audiences. It's been a pleasure to share these stories with you, and we hope to do it again. So if you have a story you would like to share, email us at csinfo@hawaii.edu. I also want to thank Ben for his stories and for emceeing tonight's program. And one last mahalo to our sponsors, the East-West Center Arts Program, Friends of Manoa Library, the Hawaii State Foundation of Culture and the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, Kainoa Senior Services, the University of Hawaii, the university's music department. And my co-producers in this series of concerts and performances, Eric Chang with the East-West Center and Jonathan Korth with the music department. Also want to thank my production crew, M. Richard, Margaret Arakaki, Anandev Banerjee, Nicholas Chaldron, and Dwayne Scanlon. And especially a big mahalo to our StoryShare band, Bailey Matsuda on piano, Chris Ye on saxophone, and Alex Morrison on bass. And to send us out, we're going to have the StoryShare band share once more with you. Thank you and mahalo.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.